This happened back when I was in high school around 20 years ago. I still remember it pretty well though. So I was in a science class during my sophomore year. It was a pretty typical science classroom that was fairly large with chairs and small desks at them. Then to the right was a large lab area with tables and more chairs. For most of the time we would be sitting at the desks, and then like once a week we would do labs. My assigned seat was at the most far back left seat in the class. There were only 2 other kids in my row of seats, and I was closest to the classroom door which led out to the hallway. I was a pretty good student, but science was not my best subject. Most of the time in class, I found myself very bored and my mind would wander. So on this day, the teacher was teaching and writing on the whiteboard and stuff. I was bored and I wasn't really paying that great of attention. I was supposed to be taking notes, but I remember that I started looking around the room out of boredom. At one point, I looked to the classroom door to my left and to the window. It was one of those doors that has a small vertical window that was skinny and not that big. But when I looked over, I saw a man on the other side looking inside of it. It was a grown adult man who I did not recognize to be a teacher at the school or anything like that. He was staring right into the room, and then his eyes locked onto mine when I looked at him. His eyes were somewhat wide, and it seemed like he must be joking around, but I had no clue who he was. I looked around to the other students, and they were all paying attention to the teacher and didn't notice the guy. And where the teacher was, as well as most of the other students were, you couldn't see the door because there were shelves that blocked the view. So I looked back to the man and he was still there, but then he ducked down and went out of sight. I went back to taking notes and just kind of shrugged it off. But it still seemed like a really weird thing, and I wasn't really sure why the guy did that. But I was still under the impression overall that it was a harmless prank. Sometime later, maybe 10 minutes, the man returned. I'd been looking over to the window periodically. Number 1, I wanted to see if the guy would come back, and number 2, I was bored. When he returned, he just started to stare at me. I looked at him for an uncomfortable amount of time and then looked away. When I looked back again a short time later, he was still there. I thought about alerting someone but elected not to. At the time, as weird as the guy was and borderline creepy, I didn't want to talk in front of the whole class. It would be disrupting to the teacher's lesson, so I didn't say anything. A short time later, the man was gone again. I went back to trying to pay attention to the teacher. Now, literally 5 minutes later, a sound came over the school intercom. Our teacher then announced that the school was being locked down. She turned off the lights and instructed us to get on the floor and under our desks. Then she went over and locked the classroom door. I started thinking about the man and wondering if he was the cause for the lockdown. I was also afraid that he would come back to the classroom. I remember some of the other students whispering to each other, and I told some about the guy. Nobody seemed to know exactly what the lockdown was for though. It lasted for about 45 minutes, which felt very long. Then finally, it was lifted. We were able to resume with our school day. At first, nobody would say what the lockdown was for, but by the end of the day, the word had spread and I found out. An adult man had actually been stalking a girl who was in my class. He followed her to the school and entered the building and hid inside. It was the same guy who I had seen looking into the classroom. The man was also on drugs, and he was arrested by the police when they found him hiding in the school. It was a big relief for everyone that he was caught. The girl in my class was not even aware of him following her. It's crazy to me that I saw him, and I thought it was just some guy joking around at first. I'm really glad that he didn't try to enter our classroom. I'm a teacher at a high school, and this is my scariest experience from my time on the job. It happened in just my 2nd year of teaching full-time. I had been hired at a high school nearby to where I had grown up. I was really happy to get the job, and the first year had gone well. Most of the students at the school were pretty good. There were a few that were not though, but I feel like most schools that size have them. One day, I was teaching class like any other. After first period was over, in between classes, I would check my cell phone. As I was doing so, I saw that I was receiving a call from an unknown number. I didn't know who it was, so I didn't bother to answer. I put my phone back down on the desk and then prepared for the second class of the day. After teaching that class, I checked my phone again and then saw that the number had left a voicemail. I decided to listen to it. When I played the message, it was what sounded like a younger male's voice, and they were talking in almost a whisper. It was creepy, and the voice simply said, "Answer my calls." Then, literally moments later, the phone started ringing again. Taking the unknown caller's advice, I decided to answer. When I did, I heard that same voice again. He said, I'm inside the school and I'm gonna get you." Then he hung up. I was really creeped out by this. I didn't know if he was serious or not, but being a new teacher, I felt like I should report it. So I called the principal and let him know about the threat made against me. The principal said that the matter would be looked into immediately. A short time later, a lockdown was announced. I followed through with the procedure for my classroom, and a few minutes after that, there was a knock on the door. Thankfully, it was one of the school staff members to ask me some questions. They talked to me in the room quietly, asking me what happened and stuff. Then they left and said that they were searching the school. The lockdown lasted for about an hour. When it was finally lifted, I was told that nobody suspicious was found inside the school and they thought that I was safe. And for the rest of the day, I was. Nothing strange or creepy happened and I had no more texts or calls. After school, I did some grading and some preparations for the following school day. Then I went home. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment by myself at the time. That night, shortly before I was going to go to bed, there was a really loud knocking on my front door. I was really freaked out immediately. I remembered the threat that I had received at school. Now somebody was at my house. Whoever was there did not knock a second time. After a minute or so, I very carefully got up and walked over to the door. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. Whoever had done it must have left. I was really on edge and thought about calling the police, but I decided not to. I was on high alert for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. It was tough to fall asleep, but eventually I was able to. The next day at school, I found out that the mystery had been solved. The number that I had received calls from had been traced to one of my students. He was a guy who hadn't shown up to class in weeks. I'm not sure if it was a prank or if he was serious, but he was kind of a troublemaker and hung out with a bad crowd. He had already been suspended multiple times and was suspended again for that. The really creepy part is that I'm sure it was him who showed up at my apartment. I have no clue how he got my number or address. Did he follow me home? That might explain the apartment, but still not the phone number. He was never in my class again, as he got expelled shortly after for selling drugs on school grounds. I'm glad that I never saw him again after that. When I was in high school during my junior year, I took an elective advanced computer class. It was not a very popular class and only had 5 students in it total. I was one of the 5, and our teacher was a really chill guy who was also the head basketball coach. My school had a really good basketball team, and he was always talking basketball and talking to the other coaches. We were all pretty good students, so he gave us a lot of independence. He would teach maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and then we would work on the computers for the rest of the week. Not much would be said, and he would play music and let us work most of the time. And when we got done and had free time, we could just play around on the computers. There were times where either an assistant basketball coach would come into our classroom, or our teacher would leave and go to theirs. They would quietly talk strategy for literally the entire class period sometimes. It never bothered me. In fact, I liked it, because being able to just get my work done on the computer was nice. The teacher didn't care if we went around on our phones either. The classroom was a smaller computer lab, and it was kind of out of the way in one of the long hallways near the end of the school. One day, all 5 of us students arrived for class like usual. Our teacher went over the plan for the day, and then he said that he would be back in a bit. He was going to one of the assistant coaches' rooms to talk strategy again. All of us got to work and began doing our assignments. About 30 minutes later, there was an announcement over the school intercom. It said that the school was being locked down and for teachers to follow the lockdown procedures. After this, the 5 of us kind of looked around at each other. We were sort of confused as to what we should do. I didn't know if we were supposed to get up and go lock the door and stuff, or if our teacher would return. We all figured that he would be back soon though, so none of us did anything. After like 5 minutes went by, one of the other students got up and turned the lights off. We still figured that the teacher would come back soon though. After like 10 more minutes, there was still nothing. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway. I expected it to be the teacher. A short time later, the door opened. We were all sitting at the back side of the classroom behind computers and facing the front. What we saw was a man enter the room who was not our teacher. I just remember that he had a messy beard, long stringy hair, and looked somewhat disheveled, wearing a black jacket and jeans. He entered the room and then took a few steps in. Then he looked around and seemed to notice us. As soon as he looked at us, he said, "Nobody say a word." The way he said it was really threatening. I was honestly pretty scared. The man paced back and forth, looking at us for a few seconds. Then he said, "Am I understood?" We all nodded our heads, not knowing what the guy was capable of. Then he walked over to the door and looked out of the window into the hallway. It looked like he was keeping watch and hiding. We all just sat there, frozen in fear pretty much. The guy would look out of the door window for a while, then pace around a little bit, look at us, then return to the door window. This went on for like 5 minutes. I didn't notice hearing anything else in the hallway during this time or anything. Then the man went to the door, opened it, and ran out. As soon as he was gone, another student ran over to the door and locked it. Then I think we all called 911 at once. We reported the guy, knowing that he was more than likely the cause for the school lockdown. We were told that the police were there already and inside of the school searching for him. About 20 minutes later, the lockdown was lifted. Shortly after, our teacher returned. The man was caught and arrested after trying to escape the school. Why he was there in the first place, I never found out. Our teacher was watching film with another coach on the complete opposite end of the school. He tried to walk back to us, but the police stopped him, saying that he was walking where the suspicious man had been. The cops had been called earlier after another teacher saw the guy and he allegedly threatened him. So we were kind of left there wondering what to do, and unfortunately we did not lock the door. Thankfully, nobody was harmed though. This is something that happened back when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and I went to a pretty average-sized school. One day, my third-hour class ended, which I had with my best friend Josh. It was now study hall, which I had in another classroom that was on the second floor. Josh had another class at the other end of the school. Josh and I walked together to our lockers, which were down in the commons area on the first floor. The hallways were already pretty quiet during this time. As we walked down the stairs, we were talking to each other and taking our time. It didn't really matter if we were late to study hall, because it wasn't a real class. You would just sit there and do homework or go on your phone the whole time, and the teachers didn't really do anything. So when we got to our lockers, there weren't really any other students around. We were still talking, and we heard a sound come over the school intercom that was not just the typical bell sound. However, I didn't really hear it. We were mid-conversation, and when we heard some talking over the intercom, we quieted down. I didn't catch it, and I asked Josh what the announcement was. He said it was a lockdown drill, so we continued talking. Josh then said that he was going to his class and walked away. After hearing there was a lockdown drill, I didn't really want to go to my classroom right away. I figured that it would be weird to walk in during a lockdown drill, so I would just stay in the hallways until it was over. The drills usually only lasted like 5 minutes anyways. My teacher would figure out that I just went to another room for the drill probably. So I started to walk slowly down the hallways, taking my time. It was now completely empty and also silent. I did want to avoid anybody else in the hallways though, because I didn't want to get in trouble for being in the hallways during a lockdown drill. As I slowly walked down a nearby hallway, I heard footsteps a ways behind me approaching. So I moved down the hallway and then turned to the left. I started quietly walking down this hallway, which was very long. I hoped that the footsteps would move away. Unfortunately, they didn't. I heard the footsteps continuing to get close to me. I started walking down the hallway as quickly as I could as the footsteps approached the corner, but there was really nowhere to go, so I decided to quickly find a place to hide. I went in between a row of lockers out of desperation. I was out of the person's sight for now, but when they got even with me in the hallway, they would be able to see me. My heart was racing, and I didn't know what was going to happen. The footsteps got into the hallway, and I was sure that it was a hall monitor or a teacher and that I would be in trouble. I decided to look and see who it was, but when I did, it was not who I expected. I saw that there was a man walking down the hallway that I did not recognize. He wasn't a teacher or anything like that, and certainly not a student. It was some guy just wearing a sweatshirt and jeans. He was walking down the hallway and in my direction, but didn't seem like he knew that I was there. As he got closer and closer, I was starting to wonder what was going on. Maybe it wasn't a lockdown drill after all, but an actual lockdown. The man got within probably 50 feet of me. Then he stopped right in front of several lockers. What he did next was very unexpected. The man climbed on top of the lockers, now standing where he had to crouch to not hit his head on the ceiling. He proceeded to remove one of the ceiling tiles and then crawled up into it, going into the ceiling. I couldn't believe what I had seen. I quickly left my hiding place and then sprinted down the hallway all the way to my classroom. When I got there, I banged on the door and I was let in by my teacher. He asked me where I had been, and I told him that I saw a guy go into the ceiling. He called the vice principal, and I later talked with him about it. The school was locked down for over an hour. Eventually, they found the man. He was a guy who had been living in the school for several days. He was able to move around in the ceilings and in back hallways. The school was kind of old and outdated, and had a decent amount of places he could hide, I guess. It was really creepy. Back when I was a freshman in high school, I will never forget the first ever lockdown I experienced. I was a short, small 14-year-old girl at the time. I had just finished my first hour class and was on my way to second. It was at the complete other end of the school, so it was kind of a long walk. I made my way over there like any other time. As I walked, I remember hearing the warning bell and the hallway quickly got more and more empty. I was still confident that I would be on time to my class though. But then, not too long after that, I heard another bell. I knew that this couldn't be the final bell because it definitely hadn't been 2 minutes since the warning bell, but I was starting to second guess myself. There was an announcement that followed the bell, and I could hear somebody talking. However, our speaker system at the school was old and really bad quality. It sounded like whoever was talking had the microphone in their mouth and I couldn't make out a word. It was just a bunch of nothing. I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but I continued walking down the hallways and I was very quickly the only person around. Finally, I made it to my classroom. When I tried to open the door though, it was locked. I was confused and not sure what was happening. As I stood around by the door, I heard a voice from a ways away in the hallway. Somebody asked me what I was doing. I looked over and saw a woman standing there. I didn't recognize her, but I thought she was a teacher. I was a freshman after all, and didn't know every staff member yet. After she asked me what I was doing, I told her that I was trying to go to my class. She called me over to her and told me that the school was in a lockdown. I hadn't known that, but now that she mentioned it, it made sense. I walked over to the woman, and she told me in a stern voice to follow her. I figured that I was in trouble for being in the hallways during a lockdown. We walked to the end of the hallway and then to the right around a corner. There was the exit doors and we walked right for them. I was confused as to why we were leaving the school, but I continued following her. Soon we walked right out of the doors. That was at the back sort of side exit to the school. It wasn't that commonly used and it headed out to the east side near the school. When we walked out of the doors, at first we turned to the right again. At that point though, I noticed a police car driving down the street that was in our view and it was driving towards the school. Almost right after noticing that, the woman quickly turned around and changed directions. She grabbed my arm and we started walking in the opposite direction. I really didn't know what was going on. I was so young, so I wasn't as quick to catch on to bad situations. But by now, I was pretty sure that I shouldn't be following this woman anymore. She started walking over to behind the school and in a grassy area. When we got over there is when I randomly just decided to run away. I just simply stopped following the woman, turned around, and sprinted back for the door of the school. I heard the woman call out to me, but she did not give chase. When I made it back to the school doors that I had left through though, they were locked. So at that point, I ran back around the school towards the front. I saw several police cars there and an officer stopped me from entering the school and asked me what was going on. When I told him, he waited with me by the police cars for the rest of the lockdown. Apparently, the reason for the lockdown in the first place was that very same woman. She did not work at the school or anything. They were able to find her walking on the side of the road about a half-mile away behind the school. I'm not sure if her intentions were to kidnap me or any random kid, but I realized how close I came to the possibility of getting abducted. That was the scariest moment of my high school career for sure. This happened back during my senior year of high school. For this particular semester, I remember that I didn't have a class during first period. This was a common thing for seniors, and it meant that I could wake up late and show up to school when first period was almost over. It always felt really nice to do that because I had been getting up super early for years. So one day, I arrived at school with about 10 minutes or so left in first period. I entered the school and then began walking the empty hallways to my locker. When I was doing this though, I heard over the school intercom that there was a lockdown. Now, I didn't really know what to do in this situation because I didn't have a class to go to, so I decided to just go into the bathroom, which looking back was a stupid decision. Obviously, I should have just found a random classroom, but that's easy to say now. I didn't know why there was a lockdown, but I thought that I could just go into a bathroom and hopefully school would resume shortly. After getting inside, there was silence for a minute or so. Then I heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. I thought that most likely it was a teacher, and I was slightly wondering if I would get in trouble if they saw me. But I wasn't too worried, because I would just explain how I had just got there and I wasn't in a class yet. The footsteps approached the bathroom that I was in, but they walked right past it. They went down the hallway and got quieter and quieter. I felt relieved that they had passed, but then they seemed to turn around. I heard the footsteps moving back and now heading in my direction again. I wondered why they had turned around. I also wondered who it was out there. I thought about going to see, but just had a bad feeling about it and decided not to. So I stayed where I was, and once more the footsteps got closer, but now they were from the other direction. Once more they passed right by the bathroom that I was in and continued down the hallway. This time they went just out of earshot and then they turned around. Once more they walked towards the bathroom and went past it. Then they passed the bathroom 2 or 3 more times. It was like somebody was out there pacing back and forth down the hallway in front of the bathrooms. I found it really strange, and other than those footsteps, everything was completely silent. Finally, they walked away and I stopped hearing them entirely. So this time, I decided that I wanted to get away from there. I was going to leave the bathroom and just go to the room where my first class of the day would be and hope to be let in. So after not hearing anything for like over a minute, I left the bathroom and went out into the hallway. However, as soon as I got there, I saw a man standing in the hallway right in the middle of it a ways down. The man was wearing a suit and a tie, but I did not recognize him to work at the school. He was not looking at me, but staring straight ahead. And the creepiest part is that he had this really large, fake-looking grin on his face. The whole sight was very unsettling. Then the man started to walk towards me slowly. He still wasn't looking at me and not walking directly at me, but in the general direction that I was in. He remained in the center of the hallway as he walked. I was so freaked out that I just took off running as fast as I could in the opposite direction. I went all the way to the end of the hallway, turned, and then ran down another one. Then I sprinted to the classroom where I had my next class period and banged on the door desperately. After a few moments, the teacher came to the door, saw me, recognized me, and let me in. I told several students as well as the teacher about the strange man that I saw. They all thought that it was really weird, but nobody seemed to know why the school was locked down, but I assumed him to be the reason. We all waited in the classroom for another 30 minutes or so, and then finally the lockdown was over. Then the school day was resumed as normal. The strange thing is that I never got a good explanation as to what the lockdown was for. I didn't get confirmation that it was for that man that I saw, but I can only assume. I heard multiple things, but nothing confirming anything. It was really strange. I'm a high school teacher, and this is something that happened a few years ago. It's probably the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. So it all started one day when I was teaching. I taught 4 classes throughout the school day at the time. I remember during the second period, right in the middle of class, there was suddenly a loud banging on my classroom door. It interrupted my teaching, and I stopped, annoyed, and walked over to see what it was. When I looked out into the hallway, nobody was there. This seemed like obviously a prank by some kids walking by who were supposed to be in class. Some of the students in my class asked about it and thought that it was funny. I was able to laugh it off as well and then continued with my teaching. The rest of the class period went by without any problems. The next class period, though, it happened again. I'm not sure if it was at around the same point in class, but it was sometime in the middle. There was a very loud knocking on the door once again. I looked over sooner this time and just barely saw through the window somebody moving away. However, I could not tell who it was at all or anything like that, just that somebody had been there. So I went over to the door, opened it, and looked outside. I was not on time to catch whoever had done it running away, so I went back inside my classroom and then told my class about how it had happened before. Then we resumed with class. As you might be able to guess, this happened yet again during the next class period. By now, I really couldn't believe it, and I was also getting frustrated. I thought about leaving my door open for the entire next class period, but ultimately I did not, and in the final class period of the day, there was actually no knocking, which surprised me but was nice. So I figured that it was probably a one-day thing and that it would never happen again. I didn't report it or anything because I didn't think it was a big deal. So the next day I was teaching my classes again. For the first 3 class periods of the day, they went by as normal. There was no knocking on my door or anything strange. Then, during 4th period, I got a call that the school was having a lockdown. I announced it to my students and started following the procedures. First, I locked the classroom door. Then I turned off all the lights in the classroom and instructed the students to leave their desks and go to the back end of the room. I also covered all the windows. Some students were asking why there was a lockdown, but I didn't know. I was not told a reason and was just told that there was a lockdown and to follow the procedure. The students were supposed to keep quiet, and overall everybody did a pretty good job. I heard some occasional whispers from my students, but other than that it was completely quiet. The lockdown continued for at least a good 30 minutes. Things were very quiet. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the same loud banging on my classroom door. I really could not believe it. The school was in a lockdown. Who would possibly be able to pound on the door like that? I got up and walked over to the door and looked through the small window. Nobody was there. Some of the students were talking about it now, and I told them to pipe down. So, about 20 minutes after this, the lockdown was lifted. Class was let out, and things resumed as normal. There was no knocking on my door for the rest of that day. When the school day was over, I talked with some other teachers because I was very curious as to why we had a lockdown. I was told that it was because a student in the school had made direct threats against another student. That did not really solve the mystery of the knocking though, unless that kid was out in the hallway banging on my door. How would anybody be able to walk around in the hallways like that during a lockdown? And why did they always bang on my door? I asked some other teachers and nobody had knocked on their doors. After that day, I never had any more knocking on my door during class. It was really weird and remains sort of a mystery to me. This happened when I was a 17-year-old girl and in high school. I played volleyball when I was in high school, and it was a big part of my high school career. I remember that sometimes we used to have practice really early in the morning before school. It was because the gym had to be shared with the other sports teams and stuff. So we would have practice at like 6 a.m. and it would go until about 8. One day I got up early at 4:45 a.m. to get ready for the day. I lived with my parents at the time in a pretty average neighborhood. Obviously it was still pitch dark outside, and I left home at about 5:30 because it was only a 10-minute drive to the school. I had a car back then that I drove to and from school every day. When I left, I backed out of the driveway, and when I did, I remember seeing a car that was parked on the side of our street. It was sort of in front of our house, which was strange because normally no cars parked on the side of our street at all. And when I started to drive away, the car's headlights turned on and then started driving down the street after me. I didn't really think much of it until I turned off our street and the car went the same way. When I turned again, it did the same. I was starting to wonder if I was being followed for some reason. I did not recognize the car and wasn't sure who it would be. I kept driving to school though, and the roads were very quiet with it being so early. Me and the other car were about the only two on the roads. Soon I approached my school with the car still behind me. I turned into the student parking lot and there were hardly any other cars there. The only other ones were my teammates. I drove around and parked pretty close to the school. The car that was following me entered the parking lot as well, but did not park near me. It went to the complete opposite far corner than me, a long ways away. This made me feel better because it was so far. Plus, now that I was at school, I felt safer because when I got inside, I would be around a lot more people. I was curious as to who was driving the other car though, so I sat in my car and waited for a minute or two. However, nobody got out. The car was backed into a parking space, so kind of facing me, except it was just really far away. I got out of my car finally and then walked inside the school. Then I got ready for volleyball practice. By the time practice started, I had forgot all about the car following me. When practice was over, it was time for the school day. Now, the next strange thing that I remember was after my first hour class. At this time, keep in mind that I had forgot all about the car following me. Now, I specifically remember that I was by my locker and standing near it talking to some of my friends. When I was looking around the crowded hallway, I saw this guy a long ways away just staring at me. It was strange because I didn't recognize him, and he also looked a little bit older. I just assumed him to be a senior who looked old, but I didn't know why he would be staring at me. I looked away, and then looked again a short time later, and he was still staring at me. I was kind of creeped out, so I looked away again and then left for my next class. During this second hour class that I was in, I remembered that the school went into a lockdown. I had no idea what it was about. The lockdown ended up lasting for almost an hour. At first, even after it ended, no information was given. By the end of the school day though, I found out that it was for a suspicious man in the hallway. Somebody who was not a student, had no hall pass and no credentials or identification. When questioned, he ran away, causing the lockdown. The police got called, and after the guy ran from them, he was arrested for trespassing. Everybody was talking about it. I didn't get confirmation, but I realized that it had to be the same guy, and I think that it was also the guy who had followed me to school from my house. It really creeps me out, and makes me wonder if he was stalking me. For some background, I'm a 36-year-old woman, and this happened 20 years ago. I was 16 and in high school. I went to an average high school with about 800 students that went there. It was a school that was close to my house, and I enjoyed going there. I had a nice friend group that I hung out with all the time, and overall things were going well for me. Until one day at school, something so crazy happened that it seared into my brain forever. So to explain it, one school day was going by like any other until we had a lockdown. I remember hearing that it was not a drill, and that made me kind of nervous. My mind was thinking of all the possibilities of what it could be, but in reality I had no clue. And this was before every student had a smartphone, so information wasn't quite as fast and we weren't able to just look things up. We sat in our classroom with the lights off and everybody was really quiet. The more time that went by, the more and more nervous I became. I tried to tell myself that everything would be fine. I was safe and in a locked classroom with a bunch of other people. I thought maybe some criminal guy snuck into the school, or maybe some student had turned violent. In reality though, I had no clue what was going on. So after like literally an hour of the school being locked down, the phone rang in our classroom. My teacher answered it and quietly talked. Then she hung up. A short time after that, there was a knock on the classroom door, and I saw the principal, 2 cops, and another man who I didn't recognize. They all looked around the room and then called my name. I didn't know what they wanted, but I got up and walked over to them. They walked with me all the way to the principal's office and told me what was going on. I was told that several students had been planning to kidnap me, and they had stopped it. This was a shock to me, as you could imagine, because I was completely unaware of it. I was told that several senior guys, as well as 2 of their friends who were 19 and 20 years old, were all in on it. They were a group of guys who I was not friends with, but I did know who they were. I had never spoken to any of them, and just knew that one of them was kind of a known drug dealer in the school. They all sat together at a lunch table. Apparently there was this one other guy who was not really in their friend group, but they were cool with. That guy sat at their lunch table and didn't really talk much, but they just kind of let him sit with them. I think he was kind of a loner, or else just really shy or something. Anyways, this guy overheard the other guys talking about kidnapping me. They were planning it out, and it was going to be right after school on the day there was a lockdown. After the kid reported it, the school did an investigation. It was proven legitimate, and they locked down the school the next day and questioned the guys who cracked under the pressure. They were expelled, and the older guys were arrested. I think the younger guys were in a juvenile detention center for a while. The whole thing still blows my mind. I'm just glad that other kid spoke up. Who knows what could have happened? Something really creepy happened to me one time in school. I was a sophomore in high school and randomly sitting in one of my classes. I was kind of bored and started to go on my phone. When I did, I saw that I got added by a random guy on Snapchat. I didn't recognize the name, but I thought that maybe he was a guy who went to my school. The high school was fairly large, so I maybe wouldn't know him. I added him back, and just like 5 minutes later, he sent me a Snapchat, and I was curious as to who he was. So I opened the snap, and when I did, it was not what I was expecting. It was a picture of a classroom door, the same classroom that I was in. I recognized it because my teacher had her door decorated a certain way with her name on it. I sent a snap back saying "what's up" because I thought it was a joke. I figured it to be another student, and I didn't even know why or how he was out in the hallways in the middle of a class period, but I thought he was just being funny and messing around. The next snap was also of the door, but taken from a different angle and a little bit farther down the hallway. It said, "Leave your class." I responded and said, "I can't, why?" The next Snapchat I got from him was a selfie of a really creepy looking guy. He was not a student, but a grown man who looked to be like 50. There was no caption to the photo at all. When I saw that, I blocked the guy. For a short time there was nothing, and then I went back to paying attention to my class. However, maybe 10 minutes later, the school went into a lockdown. Almost immediately, I had suspicion that the creepy guy who Snapchatted me might be responsible. Still, I didn't hear right away what was going on. The lockdown lasted for what felt like a really long time. I think that it was about 40 minutes. When it ended, I found out that there had been a suspicious man inside the school. The same guy who had sent me those Snapchats. The creepy thing is that I don't know how he got my Snapchat or even knew who I was, and how on earth did he know which classroom I was currently in at the time? That really gave me the creeps. I reported everything to the school and also reported it to the police. I didn't hear much more about it after that though. Thankfully, I never saw the guy again.